Joining me now on the phone is my great friend and colleague and even mentor in my intellectual thinking, Lou Rockwell from the Mises Institute, who runs one of the standards of defense of the free market, of only legitimate lawful wars, and of watching the state to make sure it doesn't take your liberty without your knowing it anywhere in the country. And here in the studio with me is R.J. Harris, who runs as a Republican for Congress, but really is a libertarian and really is one of us.
Stand by.
Yes.
Tell us about your race, who you're running against, and where are you running?
I'm running against Tom Cole in Oklahoma's 4th Congressional District. And, Judge, what happened was I, as an 18-year veteran of the National Guard and had already fought for our freedom and liberty twice, you know, I saw my district representative voting for what many have called a socialism, and I call slavery, and realized that the grassroots has to stand up and do something about it. If the Congress isn't going to do something about it, we're going to have to stand up and do something about it.
Lou, just as you were coming on, I don't know if you heard it, but our good friend Congressman Ron Paul was finishing with an argument that maybe the departure of Arlen Specter from the Republican Party, though of course he was only a Republican in name only, might have a tendency to bring the Republican Party closer to its roots, might bring us to the Barry Goldwater concept of a libertarian style Republican Party, which the conservatives once were, but since the advent of George Bush no longer are. Is this fanciful, or is there any hope for this?
No, I always remember what Karl Marx said about a specter haunting mankind. So I think it's better that he's in the Democratic Party, sure. Glad to get rid of him.
All right. Interesting that you should use the word specter. We are now joined by European Parliament member Daniel Hannan. Daniel, thanks very much for joining us. You, of course, burst on the scene with your remarkable lecture on what to a lot of us was really just basic economics 101 to your Keynesian Prime Minister at the European Parliament while he sat there and laughed as you were uttering truths in his to his face, and you become a national hero to libertarians on this side of the Atlantic Ocean as well. I understand, as much as we bemoan creeping fascism and creeping socialism here, and I have a libertarian sitting next to me who's challenging a conservative Republican on that very issue, it's actually worse in Great Britain, where more fascism and more socialism is accepted, and where I believe the Prime Minister announced just a day or so ago he wants to raise the top tax rate, we'll call it confiscation rate, to 50%. Can that possibly happen?
It's unbelievable. 50%. And when you take into account the removal of the allowances for people at that rate, it's the equivalent of 63%. The United Kingdom, which so recently was an example of successful Thatcherism and free enterprise and privatization, is now going to have the 4th highest top rate of tax in the world. You know, what kind of signal does that send out? It's not going to raise any money, right? The guys who are at that level of income know how to avoid tax, or if necessary, how to shift jurisdiction. And the Treasury knew it wasn't going to raise any money, but they've done it anyway to try and trip up conservatives. You know, are we then going to be the friends of the rich? And I don't know whether you have the same sort of positional arguments on your side of the Atlantic, but it's now become a ludicrous kind of symbolic issue for us. Everybody knows that this measure will raise no revenue, but does the Conservative Party, which is likely to win the next election, dare go into it saying the first thing we're going to do is to lift this tax on rich people?
Well, does the Conservative Party in Great Britain, unlike the Republican Party in the United States, understand basic principles of free market, that when you lower taxes, you stimulate economic activity and actually result in greater collection of revenue to the Treasury? Now, I'm not so sure that greater collection of revenue to the Treasury is a good thing. The government probably should be starved out of doing about 75% of what it does. Nevertheless, it is a free market way to do what Mr. Brown wants to do in a confiscatory way. Do the Conservatives embrace that in Great Britain?
Look, of course, everybody knows that. We saw it work. Everyone understands the Laffer curve and all that. And the government understands it. I mean, this is the really outrageous thing. The Treasury looked at this top rate proposal and said, 2/3 of people are going to not pay it. 2/3 of people in the category that you're looking at are earning £150,000 a year or more. It's going to raise almost no revenue. When you bear in mind the indirect costs of people then switching their money so that they don't pay capital gains tax or inheritance tax or anything else as a result either, it's actually going to probably be a net drain on the exchequer. But the question is, it's this rather artificial thing about how do you present that to the public. I've got to say, I think people are more sensible than politicians give them credit for. And rather than agonizing about how you sell a basically bad idea, you should just do the right thing and trust to people's understanding. I always loved that wonderful line of Edmund Burke's about why you should trust the majority rather than the chattering classes. You remember his thing about because half a dozen crickets concealed under a fern make the field ring with their importunate chink, while thousands of great cattle chew the cud, reposed beneath the shade of the oak trees. Don't make the mistake of thinking that those who make the noise are the only inhabitants of the field. I would go for the common sense of the oxen every time over the chirping of the crickets.
We have a lot of chirping of a lot of crickets in the United States. We have a president who today celebrates his 100th day in office, who tonight will hold a sort of national celebration of his presidency in the East Room of the White House with a primetime live televised press conference, and who enjoys a 68% approval rating. Even though the American public doesn't approve by anywhere near those numbers the slow march toward fascism and socialism, the president as a human being enjoys that enormous popularity, and he's very adroitly utilized that popularity to get done in the first 100 days what he wants to do. But your Mr. Brown doesn't enjoy anywhere near that popularity, and his Labor Party appears doomed in the next election. Why, under those adversarial political circumstances, do they want to tax the rich, knowing it's not going to produce £1 more to the Treasury?
First of all, the reason that our government is so much less popular than yours is because we're at the end of the process instead of the beginning of it. People have, in Britain, followed it through to where socialism inexorably leads, which is exhaustion and bankruptcy and stagnation, and then the next thing will be inflation. Why are they doing it? This is what Shakespeare talks about as second childishness. When you're kind of on your deathbed, you start embarrassingly going back to sort of infancy, and the infancy of the Labour Party is class war. It's not about raising revenue. Tax, really, for a lot of these guys, has never been a method of generating wealth for the government. It's been a method of social engineering, punishing the people they don't like, rewarding the people that they do like. And it's almost as though they know that they've lost now, but they want to at least shore up the support they have from the last remaining constituencies they have, which are the kind of hard left parts of the public sector.
One of the things that impressed me most about you, and I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes, when you addressed the Prime Minister, and then when you addressed us later here in the U.S., right on this show on Freedom Watch, was your exceptional understanding of the American political system, how we have states that are sovereign and have jurisdiction over certain areas, one of which is marriage. You talked about that. And now we have a federal government which theoretically is one of limited values and theoretically cannot do any more than what the states ceded to it when they joined the Union. What advice do you have for frustrated libertarians here who see the two parties as one monolithic entity that always wants big government? It's either a Republican version of big government or a Democrat version of big government, but they always overlook the individual. They always find more ways, and I saw this when I was a sitting life tenure judge, to justify their avoiding and evading the constitutional limitations imposed on them rather than complying with those limitations. What do you see that we can do about that?
Well, I mean, this it's not for me to decide. That was settled at Yorktown. But just as a benign observer and as a friend of America, which is the second greatest country in the world, I would say this. First of all, you have the most sublime constitution devised by human intelligence. I'm only sorry that for technical reasons I wasn't able to be on the show at the same time as Congressman Paul. He understands the importance of it being a living document, that it's not just a historical